Have you ever wondered why even the mightiest kings and centuries-old wizards fell before the visions of the Palantíri, like pawns in a cosmic chess game? Today we dive deep into Tolkien's canon, separating book from film, uncovering 3 hidden pieces of evidence that even veteran fans may have overlooked. We'll reveal how the true power of the Palantíri was never in showing the future, but in subtly distorting it. And if this analysis is correct, it completely changes how we understand the fate of crucial characters like Saruman, Denethor, Aragorn, and even the very future of Gondor. Get ready to discover why these stones were both the greatest gift and the greatest curse of Middle-earth. Have you noticed how we all seek clarity in the midst of so many uncertainties? If you also love uncovering hidden truths and rethinking old myths, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dives into Tolkien's universe. Tolkien's true genius lies in showing us that the greatest deceptions don't come from obvious lies, but from incomplete truths that our own minds twist into nightmares. If you've ever felt manipulated by partial information or made decisions based on fear disguised as caution, then you already understand exactly what happened to Saruman and Denethor. Let's begin with something most fans don't know at all. In the deepest layers of the canon, Tolkien explains in Unfinished Tales that the Palantíri were forged in Aman, the Undying Lands, by the Eldar of Valinor during the days of the trees. These were not instruments of dark magic or tools of espionage. They were, quite literally, crystallizations of pure knowledge, created as sacred bridges of communication and wisdom among peoples. The word Palantir itself means one that sees far in Sindarin, and their original function was almost holy. Here's the detail that changes everything. The Palantíri never lied, not once. They were incapable of fabricating false images or creating illusions. Every horror they caused came from something even more sinister. They revealed only fragments of truth, crafting the perfect illusion of complete knowledge. Imagine peering through a keyhole into a vast chamber. You see one portion with perfect clarity, but your mind instinctively fills in the rest based on limited vision. That is the hidden poison of the Palantíri. Partial truth is infinitely more dangerous than an outright lie. Tolkien knew exactly what he was doing when he built this mechanic. He had lived through 2 world wars and understood the machinery of propaganda. The most effective lies always contain elements of truth. When Sauron gained control of the stone of Minas Ithil, he didn't have to hack the system or corrupt the artifact. He merely chose which truths to show, turning instruments of clarity into weapons of psychological manipulation. In Peter Jackson's adaptations, we see Denethor portrayed as a madman, consumed by despair after gazing into the stone of Osgiliath. The films reduce this to sheer lunacy, a weak mind breaking under supernatural weight. But in the books, the reality is far more unsettling and psychologically much more sophisticated. Tolkien reveals that Sauron never showed Denethor a single lie. Every vision the Steward of Gondor saw through the Palantir was technically true. The massive armies of Mordor were indeed on the march. The Corsair fleet really was sailing up the Anduin. Minas Tirith truly was encircled and outnumbered. Frodo really had been captured, temporarily, at Cirith Ungol. And Aragorn did indeed appear as nothing more than a ragged ranger with no resources to save Gondor. What Sauron executed was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. He presented truths in a sequence carefully orchestrated, without context, without hope, never showing the forces rallying in Gondor's favor. Denethor saw the danger, but never saw Rohan riding to aid them, never saw the paths of the dead being claimed, never saw Frodo's resolve renewed. The distortion of perspective, temporal and spatial, was enough to break the will of Gondor's proudest man. This is a brutal lesson about how our perception shapes our reality. Denethor didn't go mad because he saw falsehoods. He despaired because he saw only the darkest fragments of a complex situation. How many bad decisions do we make in real life because we focus only on risks while ignoring opportunities? How often does the fear of failure blind us to the paths that could lead to success? Now we arrive at the most technical and fascinating aspect of how the Palantíri worked. Tolkien established very specific rules that explain why some users fell while others resisted. A Palantir never reveals more than the mind of the observer can process. But here's the deadly trick. Whoever gazes into the stone must possess extraordinary strength of will, or else be mentally dominated by the one holding the corresponding stone. Think of it as a psychic duel in real time. When Saruman looked into the stone of Orthanc, he was locked in a direct mental battle with Sauron through the stone of Barad-dûr. And Sauron had overwhelming advantages, millennia of experience, colossal power, and the knowledge that Saruman secretly craved authority. The Dark Lord didn't need to force false visions into Saruman's mind. He only had to show him truths that confirmed the fears and ambitions already lurking in the White Wizard's heart. That's how Saruman fell so completely. He began by seeing Mordor's military victories, real but partial. Gradually, he came to believe that Sauron's triumph wasn't just probable, but inevitable. And once you believe evil is destined to win, why not join the winning side and claim a share of its power? It's the oldest seduction in the world. If you can't beat them, join them. The most disturbing part is that Saruman may never have realized consciously that he was being manipulated. He genuinely believed his choices were based on rational, strategic analysis. His downfall wasn't dramatic, like Anakin Skywalker's. It was slow, logical, almost invisible. That makes his betrayal infinitely more realistic and far more terrifying. Now let's run a disturbing thought experiment. Imagine the situation from Sauron's perspective during the final years of the War of the Ring. You are the Dark Lord. You hold one of the most powerful stones ever created, and you know that several others are scattered across Middle-earth in the hands of proud, desperate leaders. You don't need elaborate illusions or intricate lies. All you need is selective truth. Want to break Denethor? Show him the real numbers of your armies, but omit any sign of hope. Want to corrupt Saruman? Reveal the genuine strength you already possess, but hide your vulnerabilities. Want to discourage resistance everywhere else? Project images of burning cities, true events in other places and times, creating the impression of total victory. Sauron's dark genius lay in understanding that the human mind has a natural tendency to complete patterns and assume the worst possible outcome. He would show an army on the march and let the observer's imagination calculate how many cities would fall. He would reveal a single lost battle and allow fear to expand it into a lost war. Sauron's greatest weapon was never the orcs or the Nazgûl. It was the imagination of his victims, turned against themselves. This is psychological warfare on a cosmic scale. Instead of trying to convince someone of a falsehood, you present true elements, stripped of context, and let the victim reach the conclusion you want. It's manipulation through omission, not outright lies. There's a fascinating theory among Tolkien scholars that the Palantíri were never truly corrupted, only misused by those without the spiritual strength to resist manipulation. And this theory gains strength when we examine the unique case of Aragorn. In The Return of the King, Aragorn deliberately uses the Stone of Orthanc to challenge Sauron directly. Not only does he survive the experience, he actually turns it to his advantage, forcing Sauron to act prematurely and reveal his plans before the ideal moment. How was this possible if the stones were so dangerous? The answer lies in three unique factors. First, Aragorn carried legitimate royal lineage, and Tolkien often emphasized that true nobility in his legendarium came with genuine spiritual resilience. Second, he approached the stone with absolute clarity of purpose and fearless resolve, unlike other users who acted out of curiosity or desperation. And third, and most importantly, he held the rightful claim to use it as the heir of Isildur. But this exception only proves the rule. For ordinary mortal kings, for leaders consumed by doubt, or for wizards already tainted by ambition, the psychological burden was unbearable. The Palantíri demanded not only strength, but purity of intent and near-impossible integrity under extreme pressure. Here we reach the emotional core of the entire analysis. Tolkien wasn't merely spinning a fantasy about magical stones, he was building a powerful metaphor about how partial information can destroy lives and entire civilizations. The lesson of the Palantíri resonates even more strongly in our own age of social media, fragmented news, and digital echo chambers. How many of us have been deceived by seeing only part of the truth? How often do we form final opinions from isolated posts sensational headlines, or half-heard conversations. The painful truth is that we all carry our own Palantíri in our pockets. Our smartphones show us carefully selected fragments of global reality, and our minds fill in the rest with anxiety, fear, or anger. Denethor saw armies marching and assumed total defeat. Saruman saw concentrated power in Mordor and concluded resistance was futile. We see negative headlines around the clock and begin to believe the world is collapsing. The parallel is both disturbing and profound. Tolkien reminds us that what destroys us is not necessarily the information itself, but the interpretation we choose to make of it. The Palantíri were neutral tools until someone decided to use them to warp perspective. In the same way, modern technology is neutral until it is steered by algorithms that profit from our fragmented attention. True wisdom lies in recognizing that we are always seeing only part of the bigger picture. The intellectual humility to admit partial ignorance may be our best defense against the modern Palantíri we carry with us. One of Tolkien's most fascinating late notes is that not all the seeing stones were lost or permanently corrupted. The stone Aragorn reclaimed was eventually purified and used for good during his reign. This suggests that the corruption was never in the stones themselves, but in the way they were wielded, and hidden here is a lesson of hope. Powerful tools can be redeemed when placed in the right hands and guided by pure intentions. The Palantíri were originally created to connect peoples and share knowledge. Perhaps our own digital Palantíri can be redirected toward those original purposes, if we have the wisdom to use them responsibly. But such redemption requires something rare. Leaders with Aragorn's integrity, the courage to confront the whole truth even when it is uncomfortable, and the humility to recognize when they are being manipulated. It's a standard almost impossible to reach, but not entirely out of reach. After diving deep into the lore, analyzing the evidence and connecting the dots, we arrive at a surprising conclusion. The true power of the Palantíri was never about predicting the future or revealing distant secrets. Their real power lay in forcing those who gazed into them to make decisions based on incomplete information under extreme psychological pressure. Kings and wizards were deceived not because the stones lied, but because they trusted what they saw without questioning the context, without seeking alternative perspectives, without realizing they were only seeing carefully chosen fragments of a far greater reality. They fell into the trap of believing that partial information equals complete knowledge. And perhaps this is Tolkien's most important lesson. In a world bombarded by fragmented information and narrow perspectives, our greatest defense is not to demand more data, but to develop the wisdom to recognize when we don't know enough to make a definitive decision. True courage lies not in acting upon what we see, but in admitting when we need to see more. As Legolas might say, contemplating the complexity of the Palantíri with his characteristic elven serenity, I always knew that seeing is not the same as understanding. And maybe that's the wisdom we all need to cultivate in our own journey through today's digital Middle-earth. Now tell me, what convinced you the most? Was it the selective power of vision, showing how partial truths can be more dangerous than outright lies? The subtle psychological manipulation of Sauron, proving omission can be more effective than direct deceit? Or the inherent weakness of those who dared to look without proper preparation, reminding us that knowledge without wisdom can be destructive? Share your perspective in the comments, because this discussion is only just beginning. And since we've been talking about visions that connect distant worlds, how about connecting yourself with our community of Tolkien lore explorers? Light the beacons of Gondor with your like and subscription, because in the next video, we'll dive into an even more explosive topic: the cursed Oath of Fëanor, the promise that literally set generations ablaze and changed the course of the First Age forever. You'll discover how a single decision, born of pride and pain, turned the noblest of elves into the most tragic figures in the history of Arda.